Number 1, some corals are fluorescent. This means that they absorb one color of light and emit a different one. So we have here two complete separate sentences. Here's the first one, here's the second one, separated by just a comma. That's a comma splice. Can't do that. Let's get rid of A. How about B? Some corals are fluorescent, which it means that. If we didn't have the it, this would work pretty well, but the it is just unnecessary here, makes it awkward. Some corals are fluorescent, end meaning that they absorb. That's sort of awkward. And so D, this is a very typical correction for this sort of sentence, where you've got your complete sentence and then your incomplete sentence followed, separated by a comma. And that incomplete sentence very often starts with words that end in ing. So this structure is very common. You're going to see this quite a bit in a number of questions. So some corals are fluorescent, meaning that they absorb one color of light. That's a perfectly constructed sentence, so 1 is D. 2, scientists have learned that shallow water corals fluoresce as part of a symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship with algae living inside X, so it. So question is, what is the noun that this pronoun is referring to? And then is it singular or plural? I do see that 3 of our options are singular, which seems to imply that probably our answer is going to be the plural option because it's the one that's left out. But let's see what this pronoun is supposed to refer to. So algae living inside what? So it seems like they're living inside the corals because the corals have this relationship with the algae living inside the corals. Since corals is plural, I need a plural pronoun, and that's got to be choice B, them. Number 3, we want to combine these sentences. Let's see. Let's start by reading the originals. By absorbing potentially harmful ultraviolet light and emitting safer pink or purple light, fluorescent corals effectively provide a sunblock for the algae. The algae produce oxygen and other products that the corals need through photosynthesis. Okay. So the previous sentence is talking about how the corals provide a sunblock for the algae, and the algae provide oxygen for the corals. So this is describing their symbiotic relationship, how they help each other. And so I want a choice that's probably going to emphasize that. So let's look at A. Sunblock for the algae, which through photosynthesis produce oxygen and other products that the corals need. I mean, that's pretty short, and typically the shortest choice is going to win on a question like this. It does show in a concise way the connection between the corals and the algae. The corals do this for the algae, and then the algae do this for the corals. So I do like A. Let's look at B. On a sunblock for the algae, happening through photosynthesis, the algae's production of oxygen and other products is needed by the corals. This sort of opening phrase here is awkward. This is just wordy. A is better. And the corals need oxygen and other products produced by the algae. This happens through photosynthesis. Again, this is just wordy. I mean, grammatically, it's fine. We can use the semicolon to separate our complete sentences, but A is just shorter and does the job, and very often on these shorter is going to be the best. D, algae with the production of oxygen and other products that the corals need coming from the algae's photosynthesis. I mean, not as bad as B and C, maybe, but still, A is just shorter. It does the job with the fewest words necessary, so 3 is A. 4, however, this finding does not explain why corals in deeper water, where sunlight is less intense, also fluoresce. So we need a verb here, and the subject here is, so it says, this finding does not explain why corals in deeper water, what's the verb? The verb is fluoresce. So this part is the subject of, that goes with this verb fluoresce. I've got a comma here, which seems to imply I'm going to need a comma here. I definitely don't want a semicolon because I don't have 2 complete sentences being separated by that semicolon. I'm not going to use a dash because I'm using a comma here, and I'm going to want to use a comma to set off this phrase. Let me delete all this. Set off this phrase from the main sentence. So I'm putting this in between commas. The main sentence would be, this finding does not explain why corals in deeper water also fluoresce. And then the non-essential phrase or clause that's in between the commas here would be added to this to describe the water. So it does not explain why corals in deeper water, where sunlight is less intense, also fluoresce. And the key is the presence of that comma means I need this comma here so that it's surrounding that phrase. And so that's why 4 is C. 5, they exposed a sample of coral to different colors of light, finding that blue light, the most lavish color of light in deep water, only reached chlorophyll close to the surface of the coral. So blue light, the most lavish. I mean, lavish doesn't make sense as a way to describe a color. Or the most generous color or overflowing color. A color can't really overflow. But when we think about abundant, that makes sense. The most abundant color means of all the light, blue is most common. And that makes sense. You're in water, right? Think about water. It's colored blue. So it would make sense that blue is the light that's most abundant. So here's an addiction question or word choice. We got to pick the right word for the meaning, for what's being expressed here, but also the word that makes sense in the context that is being used appropriately. And so in this context, for example, wouldn't describe color as overflowing, but we can describe it as abundant. And so 5 is C. 6, the team therefore hypothesized that deep water corals conversion of blue light into red-orange, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here, there's really no need for any punctuation. That is connecting with the previous part. The team therefore hypothesized that, and then it's going to describe what's hypothesized. So I don't need any punctuation here at all, before or after that. And so 6 is D. 7, which choice provides an accurate interpretation of the data in the graph? So let's read this in the context first. To test this hypothesis, the research team conducted a 2-year experiment that compared the survival of fluorescent and non-fluorescent specimens from this genus under conditions that simulated deep water light. After 12 months, the fluorescent echinophilia were blank, but only about 80% of the non-fluorescent echinophilia survived. So let's see what the data says. So here's 12 months. The fluorescent echinophilia, that's here, we can see they're at 100%. So they are at 100% survival. So to say, like in the original, that they're deteriorating doesn't make sense. Now, they're not higher than they were at the start of the study. They are where they started at 100. They're definitely not the lowest percent. They're where they started. So we can say that they're thriving, right? That they are doing well. They're all surviving compared to the non-fluorescent, which are at 80% at that point. So they're starting to die off. So relative to that, they are thriving. So 7 is B. 8, more accurate info from the graph. Around the 19-month mark, the non-fluorescent echinophilia had dwindled to about 30%. So is that true? Looks to me, 19 months, the non-fluorescent, which is the black bar, is at 20. So I'm going to change that to 20. Choice C. 9, these results suggest that the red-orange glow of deep-water corals might indeed be a symbiotic survival mechanism, just like blank corals in shallow water. So we have a comparison question. So what are we comparing here? We want to compare the red-orange glow of deep-water corals being a symbiotic survival mechanism like some other feature or characteristic that would also be a symbiotic survival mechanism. So when I look at the original, just like those of corals, what exactly is the those supposed to refer to? I don't really see a plural noun that makes sense with that. And the same problem with D. Now what about with B, the results of it? Just like the results of corals, I don't know what results of corals. Now how about D, deleting it? Just like corals in shallow waters. Let's see. The red-orange glow of deep water corals might be symbiotic survival mechanism, just like corals in shallow water. So there, again, we want to compare one sort of mechanism to another. And so what I like about choice C is that it's showing that comparison, that the red-orange glow of deep water corals is a symbiotic survival mechanism, just like the sun-blocking glow of corals in shallow waters. And we see this contrast being made between deep water corals, their mechanism, compared to shallow coral waters or shallow water corals and their mechanism, which is the sun-blocking glow. So C is the most apt, most appropriate comparison to what's already mentioned in the sentence. And so 9 is C. 10, where should we put the sentence? They began by placing echinophilia and blah, blah, blah into an aquarium. So to me, beginning, right? This is the beginning of the experiment. Sentence 1 introduces the experiment, how they're going to test their hypothesis. And then 2 warps ahead to 12 months later. So it seems likely that I want to put this after 1 because sentence 1 introduces the experiment. Sentence 2 tells us the results after 12 months. And so we kind of want to understand, what did they actually do? And when they were checking the results, like what were they measuring? And so putting this after 1 makes the most sense. So 10 is B. 11, the researchers hope that their findings can be used to improve coral conservation plans. Blank, some plans propose moving threatened shallow water corals to deep waters, but this study suggests that without the right fluorescent pigments, those corals might not survive relocation. I mean, to me, this is looking at the original, it's a pretty good example of how they hope they can use their findings to improve plans. Like, here's a problem that might be solved, or here's like an adjustment that might be made to those plans to make them better. I don't think we want to show contrast or something happening while some other thing is happening. This is not really a concluding element of the first sentence. It's not something that's logically related through cause and effect or conclusion. It really is an example. This is an example of how they can hope they can use these findings to improve the plans. So 11 is A.